Namaste and welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And I'm coming back to this show after a long time because due to the party's political work, not getting too much of time to continue with my podcast on a regular basis as I used to do earlier. But I'm very happy that I'm resuming this podcast with none other than Sai Deepak, a very popular author, a very brilliant lawyer, whose second book is about to be released on 23rd of August. So Sai, welcome to the show.
Namaste, Abhinav. Hope you're well.
I'm well, Sai, and I see that you are keeping very busy these days, right? I have been chasing you for a long time for this podcast, but thanks a lot finally for giving time. So let's start with the discussion. There are lots of critical issues which have come up in the past few months, I would say. The issue at the top is the murder carried out by individual, we are made to believe that individual Islamist in whether it's Rajasthan, whether it's other parts of the country, or the charges of blasphemy or any of the random charges. Why do you think that there isn't this upswing in these cases, like they are murdering Hindus for apparently no reason per se, and there's no fear of law and order anymore?
I think there are 3 or 4 factors that are going hand in hand. First, I think there is a certain sense of frustration, perhaps, that the previous degree of silence with which their antiques are being put up with is no more the case, and the society is becoming even more vocal. Coupled with the fact that they have their laundry list of complaints such as 370, CA, Ram Bhumi, so on and so forth. And therefore, I think the definition of terror and the execution of, let's say, terror activity, so to speak, has changed significantly. So while the government may want to see its scorecard, so to speak, on the terror front as a success, and let's say assess it more from the perspective of, let's say, bomb blasts, so on and so forth, I would like to look at it more from the perspective of the tactics having changed significantly and lone wolf attacks becoming the norm more and more. Lone wolf only from the perspective of, let's say, an individual executing it, but I don't think the activity is lone in any particular sense or lonely in any particular sense, because obviously there's a significant amount of backing that's coming from an organized group or an organized, let's say, set of individuals. Clearly, there are many organizations that seem to be behind it in different parts of the country. And I think each of them has taken responsibility for their own spheres of influence. When it comes to Karnataka, there's a certain group. When it comes to Hyderabad, there's a certain group. When it comes to Bengal, there's a certain group. So I think this is a pattern of the future. Simply because I think it gives them more plausible deniability, and they know for a fact that they have enough people who will give them intellectual cover fire on the media. That is something they're very, very confident of. And I think that's why they seem to succeed.
You just pointed out a very curious point, that we've seen these murders happening, but there's no outright condemnation of these murders by a very large section of the Hindu society. I'm not concerned with the Muslims at this point of time, but I'm saying within Hindu society, a very large section which is self-proclaimed liberal or what you call secular or whatever, they're not upfront in condemnation of such murders. In fact, they're giving cover fire that the victims are to be blamed for their own murder. Why do you think, this is a recurring problem in the Hindu society, why we have failed to get any clarity on the nature of the threat facing the society as a whole, irrespective of your political leanings?
See, the true liberals who genuinely take offense to these kind of activities and who have the guts and the gumption to condemn them are actually a micro minority. Okay. And perhaps a vanishing minority at this point. The ones who give these self-congratulatory labels such as liberals to themselves and behave in the same manner as jihadis, I would effectively put them in the same basket as the jihadis, and I have no qualms writing them off. Okay. The question that I think perhaps we should ask ourselves as a community is, how many people are we going to write off? And what is the chunk that we are looking at? And how many truly practicing Hindus who take their Hindu identity seriously and who realize that this is a civilization under siege? How many people do we actually have? The fact of the matter is that number is not proportionate to the population of Hindus in this country. It must be perhaps, hopefully, a sizable fraction of it. Two, as long as the Hindu society puts stock in secularization of its private life, its collective life, and its political life, it will continue to go down this path of producing more and more liberals who do not see a distinction between, who speak in the same language as that actress Sai Pallavi, who ended up comparing some random incidents with the organized genocide of Kashmiri Hindus. Okay, so that I think is a textbook instance of a Vogue generation talented actress who is unable to wrap her head around history and who draws all sorts of false symmetries. She represents, according to me, or at least she is an exemplar of the problem with this particular society and at this particular point of time, this particular generation. So the only way to address this, the unfortunate reality is the solution will not be palatable, is that secularization of the Hindu life in every level is not going to help your case by merely chest thumping on free speech and, let's say, human rights and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it's a cultural battle. It is religious to a significant extent, and it goes much beyond culture. Because you see, when you call it culture, you end up trying to secularize it to some extent without actually recognizing that at the heart of culture is religion. Okay, that is perhaps the epicenter from which culture emanates and radiates. So there is a religious element to it, which is undeniable. As long as we keep beating around this bush, Hindu society will continue to find itself in the same situation.
Yeah, because from the BJYM side, we just organized a public rally at the Lal Chowk of Srinagar. And that is the first political rally in the 70th year at the Lal Chowk. It was led by our national president, Tejasvi Surya. And it was a large gathering around 2,000 to 2,500 people. And then there was a bike rally to Kargil and so on. But we are getting lots of flaks by the same people. Why are you doing that? Why are you provoking those people by organizing a Tiranga rally at the Lal Chowk? Why are you provoking these people by conducting bike rally, from Lal Chowk of Srinagar to Lal Chowk of Kargil? If anything happens, that you people or BJYM of Yuva Morcha will be responsible. So this kind of defeatist mindset, living in perpetual fear, blaming yourself, I think it is deeply ingrained in the large section of the Hindu society. We have discussed a lot about these things, how we can come out of these things. But I would want to come to a point you raised about the freedom of expression. Is freedom of expression, let's say, is absolute freedom of expression even a desirable goal for any society?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think free speech absolutism is relative. And even if there is a certain degree of irony and, let's say, paradox in the particular statement itself, but I don't think there is any society which subscribes to free speech absolutism in totality. It's not possible at all. Apart from standard considerations such as state security, defamation, so on and so forth, I think when it comes to free speech, the two issues or the two primary areas of concern that most people have a problem with are issues relating to sedition and blasphemy. These are the only two issues. Other than that, when it comes to, let's say, free speech, which is directed at a particular individual, most people are sensible enough and perhaps even selfish enough to say, no, if I don't even have the right to pursue someone for defaming me, then there is a problem as far as the definition of free speech is concerned. So when it comes to protecting ourselves at an individual level, we are more than happy to draw the red line. But when it comes to protecting the community from attacks, or from, let's say, scurrilous attacks on our faith systems, on our traditions and practices, there we seem to be much more udarwadi and liberal, because obviously there is nothing personal in terms of investment, at least as far as the current Hindu society is concerned. So I think these are the two areas. I am not for a moment going to suggest an Islamofascist style of approach to blasphemy. That's never been my position. I am happy to actually draw the lines of, or the limitations on free speech from a religious perspective, more from dharmic perspective, which is to say, criticism is permitted, disagreement is permitted, apostasy is permitted, atheism is permitted. What is perhaps the small area for literally enforcing blasphemy would be a scurrilous, unprovoked, provocative, let's say, stylization. The way I think Durgama was recently portrayed by, what is the lady? I think Leela Manimegalai. Right? So that, I think, is a textbook example of genuinely trying to hurt the sentiments of a particular community for no rhyme or reason and hiding behind the facade of artistic expression. So for instance, if you really have a point to make and you're trying to unpack a particular layer and ask yourself whether this conventional narrative holds water, is there any other way to look at it? Is there a folk narrative to it? I'd still understand. but you've fashioned a completely fictional narrative which has got nothing to do with any form of representation of Durga Ma or Kali Ma for that matter, all in the name of, let's say, free speech and expression. And that seems like the typical or the textbook act of a rebel without a cause who merely offends for the sake of it. Okay. That I'm not really sure would pass muster in most jurisdictions or even from a dharmic perspective. So I'm not going to really draw the lines as narrow as possible, let's say, as the Islamists would like to. But I would not go on to the extent of saying, as far as Hindus are concerned, it's a free pass, you can do whatever you want. That I'm not willing to concede under any circumstances.
Very interesting point, because that has been the narrative for the last 6-7 years, that India is no longer on the right path when it comes to the liberty and the freedom of expression, that India is declining on the freedom index, India is declining on the democracy index. And I find it very funny because the same people, the people on the left spectrum of the politics or the liberals, they say, well, you cannot judge the students on the basis of marks. Somehow you cannot judge the students coming from the same neighborhood on the basis of marks, but you can judge the entire world, different countries on the basis of some random democracy index, freedom of expression index, press freedom index, and whatnot. So it's a funny thing, but a lot of pushback is coming against India at this juncture by a very determined lobby and also, several left politicians in the West, that India is no longer a liberal democracy. And that is why the West should no longer support India when it comes to different challenges India is facing. So they should start treating India as a pariah state. It's no longer a liberal democracy. Maybe it's just like Russia or China or Iran. And I sometimes think, and I have talked about it openly on Twitter and other thing, that liberal democracy is not a desirable goal. What do you think about it?
If liberal democracy has a textbook, let's say, definition, or if there is an embodiment of it, and if America is supposed to be the embodiment of it, I genuinely hope we never become an America. Okay? It's a country which is on the cusp of implosion for all sorts of reasons. And it's a country that has lost its sense of self. And apart from, let's say, the islands of military-industrial apparatus, or perhaps certain organizations from the statist perspective or pseudo-statist organizations, it's a country that is losing all sense of proportion, and to the extent that several countries in the West have chosen to actively ban any kind of humanitarian, or let's say humanities exports. France effectively says, we don't want your garbage at all. Please keep that to yourself. It's not just Russia. I can understand if Russia alone has a problem with all sorts of things that US is exporting, but even France is saying, please keep the garbage to yourself. We don't want it. Don't shove it down the throats of French academia. So I'm not going to ever subscribe to Western liberal notions, because I've read enough to know that it has a very parochial connotation to it. And most importantly, these hypocrites really don't have the moral authority to pontificate to Bharat, because they've been funding China's growth for the last 30 years. What China is, it's not as if China has been a paragon on human rights when it comes to the last 3 decades, or at least since the 1970s. Before 1970s, it was even worse. And after that, you've had multiple incidents. Tiananmen Square has not changed any investment patterns. That hasn't happened. So I don't think the West needs to be taken seriously on this front. They are traders with a mercantile bent of mind. Throw them the market and they'll come wagging. That's all. That much is very clear. You give them, let's say, an opportunity to invest in Bharat's market in one place or the other, then they'll start singing praises. So if at all the West starts raising issues of human rights, rest assured that is being used as a bargaining chip for, let's say, for geopolitics or for national security or plain and simple commerce. Beyond that, it has no purpose at all. It's simply an optically correct stick for the West to wield in order for it to have an edge at the negotiating table when it comes to trade negotiations. That's how the West has operated. I don't think there's any reason to try and pander to their notions. They can do whatever they want. At the end of the day, economics will do what it has to.
Well, that's true. Even I don't see liberal democracy as a desirable goal, because, this entire idea that every country has a similar kind of historical trajectory, and the West represents some kind of finality to the human progress. This is a very Eurocentric, or I'd say nowadays with America-centric worldview, that India should become a country with the absolute freedom of expression like America, or become a secular country like America. Debatable whether America is secular or not. But coming to the concept of secularism itself, with the recent murders and attacks on Hindus, by the Islamists, And this has been going on for a very long time, in the modern history, for more than 150 years now. Do you think that secularism itself is a failed concept? It's not that in India we're not following real secularism. It's not that there is some kind of pseudo secularism or pristine secularism. Is secularism itself a flawed construct and a failed concept in a country like India?
Secularism as a concept is fundamentally designed to keep out indigenous and native traditions. So I am not on the question of whether it's a flawed construct or whether its implementation or understanding in India is flawed. I am saying by definition and the manner in which it has been constructed and the way it has been implemented traditionally has been to keep our identity out. So I am not going to talk of whether, let's say, there are inherent problems with it. I am going to say it is perfect from a Christian perspective, and precisely for that reason, it is problematic for us. Okay? Because that particular concept, the way it has been understood, secularism itself has undergone a conscious secularization where its Christian origins and its Christian underpinnings have been completely forgotten in Bharat. And a significant amount of this discussion I've undertaken in the first book, citing Jacob D. Ruber and Balagangadhara. So whenever someone says it's pseudo-secular, I typically say that anybody making the argument that you're being pseudo-secular doesn't understand secularism, has not wrapped his head around that particular concept. Even if you're perfectly secular on paper and in practice, it is bound to lead to de-Hinduization of Bharat. And therefore, it is unacceptable, it is undesirable, and it is positively dangerous.
Yes, but the Muslims also make the same kind of view that secularism is essentially a Western concept. In fact, the Western European concept, which is not applicable on the countries like in the Middle East or in the West Asia. Right. Why have Hindus failed to come up with such sophisticated arguments, intellectual response to the West, which Muslim world has, by the way? Lots of Hindus tend to think that, well, Muslim world is incapable of sophisticated thought, that the Islamists are this bunch of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That's not true. The Islamist literature is a very strong post-colonial literature, and very few Hindus have actually read those literature. Why do you think that the Muslims were able to come up, and I mean the Africans, the Arab countries, and why Indians could not, despite tall claims of being whatnot, 5,000-year civilization and Vishwaguru and everything, you cannot even respond to the Western intellectual challenge?
So thankfully, what I've done is that I've tried to address this particular question significantly in the second book. So without revealing too much, all I would want to say is each time we are tempted to dismiss the Islamist as a barbarian who doesn't know how to operate in the modern world or is incapable of presenting a rational argument, well, look around yourself. He has more area than you. He has expanded. And if you think it's purely on the strength of the sword, then you forget that he's managed to even resist the West significantly after the fall of the Ottoman Sultanate. Okay, so let's be very clear about the fact that the end of the Ottoman Sultanate did not result in the fall of, let's say, Islam, so to speak. That hasn't happened. They found ways to revive and rejuvenate themselves. And there's a good reason for this. And the reason is, no matter how much we try and make the claim that Islam is an equal society or it's a brotherhood, so on and so forth, the lead role played by the Sayyids of that particular community, from Arabia to Iran to Bharat to all these places, has ensured that that one particular focal point of constant ideation and resistance to the West remains immutable and unchanged. Okay, from the Mopla riots to, let's say, the head of Iran, or let's say the supreme head of Iran, everybody happens to be a Sayyid. There is a continuity of thought from a religious perspective as well as a politico-religious perspective that they've managed to retain. And the fact of the matter is, Islam has presented a better response and a stronger and a vociferous response to the West compared to the Bharatiya civilization, because it has not undergone the degree of secularization that Indian society has or Bharatiya society has. From a linguistic perspective, from, let's say, a religious perspective, and even from an outwardly perspective, they've managed to retain their originality. You may disagree with it, you may like it, or you may not like it. But these are realities that you must face. In my view, post-colonial literature is the secularized modern form of Islam's resistance to the West. Because no wonder No wonder Bharat and Palestine are seen as the centers of post-colonial resistance. Okay. And India, not because it is a Hindu resistance, but because of Nehruvian Marxist, let's say, leadership of the post-colonial school of thought. So, therefore, if you look at even Syed Ahmad Khan's approach to combining Islam and modern education, it is post-colonial in nature, wherein he chose not to drown himself in modernity, but chose to use the colonial establishment and modernity against itself for Islamic goals. No wonder Aligarh was treated as the Muslim arsenal of Bharat, which ultimately led to the creation of Pakistan. This was the success of the post-colonial strategy at work from an Islamic perspective. You can't use that particular strategy for a different reason, because post-colonialism has serious problems. In fact, post-colonialism lends itself to Abrahamic employment more than Hindu employment. Okay, it is much more capable of being used by Muslims than Hindus, which is why Hindus may have to look at decoloniality as opposed to post-coloniality. That's been my traditional position. That's why I developed this particular argument. So I'm completely with you to the extent of saying that Hindus have a lot to learn from the resistance put up by Islam to the West, and at the same time recognizing that both equally have challenges to Bharat or post challenges to Bharat. They are not mutually destructive facts. Both of them can be equally valid.
Very true point. But you also mentioned your upcoming book. First, let me ask, what was the overall reception of your first book? I think this is the right time to look back and say, think about what impact did it have on the discussion, intellectual discourse in India. Was it completely ignored? Were there some responses to it? Are students reading it and coming up with more arguments? Maybe not completely buying your argument, but let's say thinking in different manners than before.
Right. See, I genuinely believe that the book has been a commercial success, which I think is a secondary factor. Okay. But what it was meant to do, at least from my perspective, was to challenge preconceived and existing notions. And I know for a fact that it has done so in certain IIMs. It has done so in, let's say, some premier institutions in Delhi which are dedicated to humanities. It has done so in law schools, which have been the traditional strongholds of the left. It has done so in several parts of the country without any particular region being immune to its influence. At the same time, the book has certainly drawn flack from a certain section within the non-left and obviously from the post-colonial left. Okay. And there, I have said so as much in the book, that there are certain overlaps and intersections between the post-colonial left and certain sections of the non-left without the non-left actually realizing it. And this was not meant to be a personal statement. This was meant to say it is a product of our conditioning. And had I not been exposed to this particular literature, perhaps I would have also said the same thing. In fact, until 2015, I was also saying the same thing when it comes to caste and other issues. I'm not even going to run away from that particular fact. So what I would say is that the book has initiated and triggered conversations at various levels, in particular among the youth. The biggest segment where the book has found a significant degree of purchase is between, I would say, 19 to 26. That age bracket, it has significantly broken and it has made a dent. Okay. And the fact of the matter is, every day on Instagram, I get a story with someone actually putting up the picture and saying, I'm reading this portion, I'm reading this portion. While they have certainly said that the language is a bit dry, it's a bit hard, and that it requires the dictionary, so on and so forth, I said, my apologies. I said this at the outset, that as a lawyer, there is a legit style of drafting that comes with it as a litigator. So it has taken a toll on my ability to write freely and loosely in a more malleable fashion. But that has not come in the way of people actually taking ownership of the book. Book club discussions, clubhouse discussions, all sorts of things have happened. And the best part is they are eagerly waiting for the second book. I've done my best to incorporate all the feedback and make the second book even more readable, although it's a bigger book than the first one. It's about 632 pages, the second book. The first book was about 483 pages. That's the comparison.
Yes, and in the second book, you call India a sandwiched civilization. But that's a very interesting term you have used. What do you actually mean by sandwiched civilization? It's like a completely new terminology we are looking at here.
This was fairly an informal use of words, which I feared would not be received well. Okay, but I couldn't find a better substitute or a synonym to convey this message. which is to say that you're actually stuck between two forms of expansionist colonialities. One represented by India, which has a predominantly Eurocentric quotient, and the other represented by Pakistan, which has a predominantly Middle Eastern or Islamo-supremacist quotient. Okay. Therefore, the indigenous identity and the native consciousness of this particular country finds itself wedged between these two because both of them have chosen to form a convenient collaboration, a strategic collaboration, which I have cited and supported extensively using their own debates in the book, saying how they constantly spoke of forming an alliance and forging an alliance because both of them are Ahle Kitab. They say so as much in their own respective parliamentary debates and in their own, let's say, internal conversations. So how both of them have collaborated to the detriment of Bharat's indigeneity and how we are unable to look past it is the attempt of this particular book. And therefore the word, or let's say therefore the title being India, Bharat and Pakistan, so that I strike a distinction between India and Bharat in the first place, and also say that post 1947, Bharat's psyche is significantly influenced by the act of partition.
Yes, that's true. And that's the fact we don't want to recognize that.
Correct.
You cannot discuss anything in Indian political society without recognizing that there was a partition in 1947. No
Correct.
debate, whether it's on the religion, whether it's on the society, whether it's on the CA, whether it's on the Article 370, is valid without that historical context. And the funny thing
Correct.
is that the people who always talk about historical context tend to forget this major fact, major thing which happened in 1947, something
Correct.
which is still continuing, that has not stopped. But you also talk about Pakistan in the title itself. I'm going to ask you something a bit different from the normal discussion. How do you read what is happening in Pakistan? And I don't want a micro perspective. We have enough experts who give you, what's happening strategically, tactically inside the Pakistan. From a bird's eye view, from that macro view of the civilizational continuity, from that gaze, what do you think is happening in Pakistan and how may that impact India in the future? Because I don't share that very optimistic, triumphalist view of the history. I think history has more periods of chaos, barbarism than of civilization. So what do you think is happening, if I may ask so?
I would say the success of Pakistan lies in the current state of affairs in Afghanistan. Okay. So I believe that hopefully the West has understood the nature of the beast it has been trying to deal with and tame, and hope that it could be bought. The fact of the matter is that Pakistan is driven by brilliant, intelligent and committed core group of people, whether you call them as part of the state establishment or specifically the ISI establishment, who've managed to retain that continuity of thought since the 1920s, not the 1940s or 50s. This thought has been going on since the 1920s at the very least. Okay. So the continuity of thought, which sees not Kashmir, but Bharat as unfinished agenda, okay, is something that we are unable to understand. So whenever any idiot, a rank idiot says Kashmir de do, baat khatam ho jayega, I say, tum pagal ho kya? Matlab dimag mein hai kya? What have you made of itihas for that matter? And what have you made of the Khilafat movement? What have you made of the movements before that, if according to you, Kashmir is the only thing they are angling for? The maps that were exchanged had Bharat literally balkanized, so to speak, with Assam gone, Eastern Bengal gone, Hyderabad gone, portions of Malabar gone, then Kashmir gone, so significant portions of Punjab gone. With all this, what do you think they wanted at the end of the day? For them, this is an extension of the Mughal agenda. They somehow certainly want that entire country. So I believe that Pakistan remains where it was. And अगर हम इसको जज करेंगे on the basis of economics, ये डूब रहा है, मर रहा है, भाई ऐसा नहीं होने वाला है, because they will always manage to find some fellow who continues to pay the rent to keep the state alive, so that it can pursue its unfinished agenda, even at the expense of its own basic necessities and its own people. They don't care about that. Their hatred for Bharat and their need to dominate Bharat is always going to be much more than the love for their own people. Okay, so whatever ammunition that they can get and whatever they can latch onto to pursue and advance this particular cause, they will do so. I have not seen any particular change of that particular status so far. If anything, Pakistan has managed to create many more collaborators and friendlier voices within Bharat than Bharat has managed to create pro-Bharat voices there. Because once in a while we have these videos circulated about POJK and all that on WhatsApp. Dekho, wo bhi Bharat join karna chahte hain. I said, are you crazy? These guys are talking about electricity and everything. They're not talking of getting back to Bharat for any other cultural reasons. If Pakistan was providing them free electricity or good electricity and basic living conditions without actually using them as a resource or a colonial territory, they'd be happy to stay with Pakistan. Okay, so this wishful thinking that we have, they want to be with us. I think this is that Lahore Amritsar sentiment, which I don't subscribe to. Okay, ऐसा नहीं हो सकता है. Our national, let's say, security and civilizational safety cannot be staked at some kind of Lahore Amritsar nostalgia. That can't work. Okay,
but coming back to your book, Sai, you talked about the entire expansionist coloniality which India is facing. What are the other topics you have touched in the book? It's a kind of a sneak peek into your book, so you can be as brief as you want, but let us know what are the topics we can expect.
So what I had promised to do in the second book, I have not. Instead, I think I have done something better, because what I've done in the first book was to draw the Eurocentric Christian line. And here in the second book, I've drawn the Islamic or Middle Eastern line and also explained how it merged with the Christian line. And I stopped at December 1924, which effectively marked the end of the Khilafat movement for all practical purposes from a movement perspective, not from a sentiment perspective. Okay. And I stopped it at a point where I asked myself the question was, let's say, the reality of Pakistan so out of the pale of reasonableness and conception at the end of 1924? Were we not clear about what was happening? Or is it my hindsight bias that is making me wiser? Okay, so that's exactly where I've stopped it. So the book starts effectively at 1740 after the sack of Delhi by Nadir Shah, and goes until 1924 December. So all major riots between 1921 and 24 have been covered. Then the riots of Eastern Bengal of 1905 have been covered. 1906, 1907 have been covered. What kind of discussions took place in the British Parliament with respect to each of these issues? So you see, each time when a constitutional lawyer in this country wants to talk about the origins of Bharat's constitution, they start with Constituent Assembly debates. Maximum 1935 Act tak jaate hain. They don't go beyond that. And उसका हिस्ट्री से क्या लेना देना है, especially civilizational politics के साथ क्या लेना देना है, that issue is never ever touched upon. So the book takes forward the constitutional civilizational discussion or civilizational constitutional discussion, which I started in the first book. So in essence, that's what this is. I stop at December 1924. Now the rest of the portion is 1925 to 1950. I want to see if I'm able to finish this in one book or two books. So it may not remain a trilogy, it may become a quadrilogy.
I think you will need 2 books or maybe more, Sai, because then you'll be entering a very different arena. Lots of literature available for you. But my final question to you, we are talking about constitutional history and many other things. A very major event took place with the election of Draupadi Murmu ji to the post of the president.
Right.
Post of the president, as you know, constitutionally is more of a symbolic post, right, but the symbolism is of huge significance. Right. For the first time, tribal woman is the president of Republic of India. What does this signify in the civilizational journey of India? What does this signify in the political journey of the modern India? And why are our friends from the left so angry about it?
A devout so-called Adivasi, I wouldn't say Adivasi, I would say Janajati Hindu, okay, who continues to let's say, openly wear her faith in Lord Jagannath on her sleeve and does not see a contradiction between the supreme office that she has adorned and her personal beliefs, is, I think, the single biggest reason for giving nightmares to people in JNU and other such institutions across the country. Okay.
Well, I am also from JNU, bhai. Kabhi chhod diya karo hum logon ko. Anyways.
Let's say at least a significant cross-section of JNU. Let's not brand the entire institution as a player, right? And maybe we can say TISs fully, barring certain islands of resistance there. So I think that's a fantastic message to the so-called Indologists who do not spare a day and who constantly indulge in 24/7 shaming of Bharat for caste and this and all that. That's one. The second thing is, I think it's a powerful message. It's a fantastic message to all strands of the Hindu community that at the very least, certain identities are not going to define, or let's say, certain identities will not. How do I put this? What's the best way to put this? So, those identities which have been typically used as a stick to beat Bharat with, okay, that even those identities find a space in our constitutional establishment, and the Supreme Constitutional Establishment is a great message that's been sent. Three, I think, dare I say that this works fantastically well for Bharat's foreign policy from the perspective of engaging with our, let's say, look east policy or other places as well, because we are not trying to cater to the Western establishment through our appointments. Okay, we are not trying to cater to Western sensibilities through our appointments. I'll give you a good example. Ashutosh Mukherjee was selected. Was it Ashutosh Mukherjee or was it SP Sinha? Yeah, I think SP Sinha was selected as the member of the Viceroy's Council in 1909, apart from his legal qualifications, for the primary reason that he was fairer in complexion and also because he was much more comfortable with the European community. This is an excerpt that I've captured in my book where they say as much in their private correspondence. Okay, that's how appointments were made as far as pre-independent Bharat is concerned. Okay, and I suspect that policy continued even after independence. People were chosen not just on the basis of their qualifications, but also on their, let's say, cosmetic likability for the West. Okay, no wonder I think these left liberals go gaga over Nehru because of his English and because of his so-called presentability. That's how they see it. Okay. In fact, they are the ones who constantly ask for diversity and representation and whatnot. And for the first time, we have a lady such as Murmuji occupying the top position as the supreme commander of Bharat's armed forces. And they couldn't find it in themselves to actually rejoice and celebrate this moment. I'd say shame on them, and they've given us a fantastic opportunity to expose their hypocrisy and their entire strategy of using caste and tribe as identities and as weapons to constantly drive a wedge within the Hindu community. So I think this is a fantastic decision by the BJP.
Yes, and if you notice, none of the opposition leaders have actually paid a courtesy visit to her after her election. This basically shows how rattled they are. But let's hope that we will have more such great acts of symbolism, political symbolism and political act by the BJP, which will keep rattling them in the years to come. But thanks a lot, Sai Deepak, for your time. It was a wonderful discussion, and we are eagerly waiting for your book. And I hope that will be a grand success, a bigger success than your first book. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Abhinav, because you managed to take time out of your busy schedule. I think you're busier than I am today. Thank you for taking the time out for this discussion. I hope we get to see you more often. This is your original avatar. Please don't give it up.
No. I have no irada of giving it up. And thank you, audience, for listening to us. And I will definitely try to be more frequent on the channel. The point is that the schedule is very erratic. It's more than busy, it's very erratic. So I cannot commit a time to Sai Deepak. That Sai on 3rd of August at 6 p.m. we will record this conversation, because on 3rd of August I may get a call. Ye meeting yahan pe hai, ya yahan pe jana hai, ya wahan pe aana hai. So, but thanks a lot. See you soon. Take care.